On a frigid January night in 2023, the piercing cold of Manhattan cut through every layer of clothing like sharp blades, seeping into every crack and crevice. The icy winds from the Hudson River whipped through the streets, turning Manhattan into a frozen maze. On Fulton Street, the glow of skyscraper lights reflected off the white snow, but even that couldn't chase away the biting chill. Donald Trump, wrapped in a long black overcoat, walked slowly along the sidewalk. He had just finished a private meeting in a nearby financial building, but instead of stepping into the waiting limousine, he chose to walk, a rare decision for him. "I need to feel the pulse of the city again," he said to his security team. As he passed a street corner leading into a narrow alley, Trump stopped abruptly. In the dim flicker of a streetlight, he saw a man slumped against a brick wall, curling in on himself as if to fight off the bone-chilling cold. The man wore a threadbare sweater, stained and torn in places. Around his neck, a small silver cross dangled gently, catching the faint light. In front of him was a piece of cardboard with shaky, desperate handwriting. "I used to be a priest. Please help me." Trump stood still, his eyes fixed on the man. His security detail immediately moved closer, their posture tense. "Sir, this isn't a safe area. We should move," one of them murmured. But Trump raised his hand, signaling them to step back. He stepped closer, the crunch of snow beneath his polished leather shoes breaking the silence. The man lifted his head, his hollowed eyes staring back, a bottomless sea of sorrow. Yet deep within those eyes, Trump noticed a faint flicker of something else, a sliver of faith that hadn't completely died out. "Who are you?" Trump asked, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight of authority. The man hesitated, as if deliberating whether the stranger before him could be trusted. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough and weathered, like an old church organ that had been left to decay. "I'm Joseph, Father Joseph. I used to be a priest, until everything fell apart." Trump crouched slightly, his gaze drawn to the silver cross hanging loosely around Father Joseph's neck. "How did everything fall apart?" Trump asked. There was no judgment in his tone, only a rare and genuine compassion. Father Joseph let out a dry chuckle, a sound heavy with bitterness and pain. "The church I served closed its doors. The congregation scattered. I lost everything, my community, my purpose, my faith in myself. And now, I'm nothing more than a forgotten ghost in this city." Trump remained silent. He didn't walk away or interrupt. Instead, he simply stood there, allowing Father Joseph's words to linger in the frosty air, like a confession from a lost soul searching for redemption. Finally, Trump extended his hand, a firm yet compassionate gesture. "Get up, Father. You don't belong here." Father Joseph stared at the hand stretched out before him. It was a strong hand, one of power and authority. Yet in Trump's eyes, he didn't see pity. He saw truth, a chance, a faint light breaking through the darkness. After a brief moment of hesitation, he reached out and placed his hand in Trump's. The warmth of that hand coursed through him, cutting through the cold that had gripped his body for so long. "Let's go," Trump said, pulling Father Joseph to his feet. "We're going to do something about this, starting today." In the dim glow of the streetlight, the silver cross around Father Joseph's neck shimmered like a small lighthouse beacon. It was the first sign of a journey neither of them knew would go on to change their lives forever. Father Joseph woke up in a small but cozy hotel room. The faint light of early morning filtered through the curtains, casting a calm stillness over the room. On the small wooden table beside the bed was a steaming cup of tea, still warm, and a neatly written note. "Rest well, Father. Tomorrow, we'll talk. Donald." Father Joseph picked up the cup of tea, letting the warmth seep through his cold hands. hands that had grown accustomed to the harshness of the streets. He took a deep breath, letting the steam fill his chest. For the first time in years, he felt safe, no longer needing to run or fear. Last night, when Trump had extended his hand, it wasn't just his body that was lifted, but his very soul, as if it had been revived from a long slumber. The next morning, Father Joseph met Trump at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Unlike the luxurious image often associated with Trump, the cafe was simple, peaceful, as if the choice of location carried a deeper meaning. When their coffees were placed on the table, Trump spoke first. "Father, could you tell me your story? I want to understand what you've been through." Father Joseph looked up, his hollow eyes reflecting a sadness that only someone who had lost everything could truly know. He began speaking slowly, his voice steady but heavy, as though he was unearthing memories long buried. "I used to run a small church in the outskirts of Queens," he said, his gaze distant, as if recalling a life that felt like another world. "We weren't wealthy, but that community was my family. We cared for one another, teaching the children in Sunday school, comforting the elderly in their final days. It was everything to me." He paused, his voice catching in his throat, but then things started to change. After the economic crisis, families began moving away to find work. The congregation grew smaller and smaller, and eventually, the church couldn't afford to stay open. The doors closed for the last time, and with them, so did my purpose. I lost my job, my community, and over time, I lost the meaning of my life. Father Joseph lowered his head, gripping his coffee cup tightly, as if trying to draw strength from its warmth. "I prayed," he continued, his voice trembling. "I prayed for a sign, for anything to show me that God was still listening. But as the years went by, his silence made me feel like I had been forgotten." He stopped, his eyes glistening as he looked at Trump. "But last night, when you reached out your hand to me, I thought, maybe he was answering me after all." Trump held his gaze, his own eyes reflecting a deep compassion, not the pity of someone who looks down on another, but the empathy of a man who understood what it meant to lose and to hope again. "You were never forgotten, Father," Trump said, his voice firm and resolute. "Maybe your life has gone through a dark chapter, but I believe your light is still there. And I want to help you share your story, not just to help you, but so the world can understand that people like you, those who dedicate their lives to others, still have immense value." Father Joseph sat quietly, Trump's words weaving their way into his soul, reigniting a small but powerful spark. Part of him wanted to decline, afraid that he wasn't strong enough to take on such a task. But another part, deep within his heart, told him that this was an opportunity to do what was right, not just for himself, but for others who were just as lost as he had been. After a long moment of reflection, he nodded. "If my story can give someone hope, then I'll try." Trump smiled warmly, a confident and reassuring smile. "Good. Let's start from here." Father Joseph. A few days later, Father Joseph received an invitation from Trump to meet in a private conference room at the hotel where he was staying. When he entered, he saw a thick envelope placed neatly on the wooden table. Trump sat across from him, his expression calm but his eyes carrying a quiet intensity. Trump pushed the envelope toward Father Joseph. "This is $50,000, he said, his voice steady and clear. "You can use it however you see fit. It's a gift to help you start over." Father Joseph stared at the envelope, saying nothing. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were crisp, freshly printed bills. The faint scent of new paper drifted out, stirring emotions he couldn't quite name. It was a sum of money he had never seen before, an amount that could change everything. With this money, he could rent an apartment, buy new clothes, and rebuild his life from the ground up. Trump watched him carefully, offering no further explanation. This wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge, a silent test to measure Father Joseph's compassion and the depth of his faith. Over the next few days, Father Joseph carried the envelope as he wandered the streets of Manhattan. He didn't keep a single dollar for himself. Instead, he visited the corners of the city where the homeless gathered, the subway stations where people huddled under thin blankets, and the hidden places where the city's light rarely reached. He used the money to buy hot meals, warm blankets, and sturdy clothing for the people he met. But he gave more than material things. He offered words of encouragement, firm handshakes, and, at times, brief prayers. To each person, he looked into their eyes and said, "God has not forgotten you." One evening, he came across a young woman named Rachel, clutching her small child tightly in her arms as they huddled beneath the awning of a convenience store. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. Without hesitation, Father Joseph bought them food, clean clothes, and arranged for them to stay at a nearby shelter. Before he left, Rachel grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You just saved my son and me." When Father Joseph met Trump again at the end of the week, he placed the empty envelope on the table in front of him. "I've used all the money," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Not for myself, but for those who needed it more." Trump leaned back in his chair, studying Father Joseph for a long moment. His eyes shone with a pride that he didn't bother to hide. "You know," Trump said, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I'm not surprised. I suspected you'd do exactly that, and you've passed the first test." Father Joseph furrowed his brow. "A test?" Trump nodded. "I wanted to see if you would hold on to your values when faced with the opportunity to change your life. And you've shown me that your faith and compassion are real." Father Joseph didn't respond immediately. He bowed his head, as if to collect his emotions that had begun to rise within him. After a moment, he looked up, his eyes shining with renewed determination. "If I have the chance to help someone else, I will take it, even if it's just a little, because that's what I was taught. That's what God wants me to do." Trump smiled, his gaze filled with admiration. "Father Joseph, you've proven that faith isn't just words. It's action, and your actions have the power to change the world." One quiet weekend morning, Trump appeared at the hotel where Father Joseph was staying, carrying another envelope. But this time, it wasn't money inside. When Father Joseph opened the envelope, he found a gleaming key and a small note with an address written on it. Trump smiled, his eyes alight with excitement. "This is for you," Trump said. "A small house in the suburbs, quiet enough for you to rest and start over." Father Joseph stared at the key, as though it were something too far out of reach. "A house for me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Trump replied. "Not just a place to live, but a new beginning. You deserve it." When Father Joseph arrived at the house for the first time, he could hardly believe his eyes. It was a charming little home with a red-tiled roof and white walls, nestled under the shade of a large oak tree. Inside, the furniture had been thoughtfully arranged: a comfortable bed, a small dining table, and a fully equipped kitchen. But instead of seeing it as a place for him to settle into a life of ease, Father Joseph felt it was an opportunity to do something far greater. In the first few days, Father Joseph spent his time cleaning and organizing the house. As he moved through each corner, he imagined how the house could become a true haven, not just for him, but for others who needed it more. Within days, he began opening the doors to the homeless. The first few visitors came with hesitant eyes and guarded hearts, unable to believe that a stranger would offer such generosity. One of the first to arrive was Henry, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a weathered face. Henry looked at Father Joseph with suspicion. "What do you want from us?" he asked warily. "No one helps for free." Father Joseph simply smiled and handed Henry a clean towel. "You don't need to worry. This house belongs to everyone. I just want you to be warm, fed, and have a place to rest." Gradually, others began to come. A young woman named Maria, who had been evicted after falling behind on rent. A veteran named Jack, who had lived on the streets for 5 years. They found more than shelter in the house. They found hope. Father Joseph personally prepared meals for everyone. He cooked hearty soups, laid warm blankets on each bed, and took the time to listen to each person's story. Every evening, he sat with them around the small dining table, leading them in prayer and offering words of encouragement. We are not forgotten by God. Believe that this is just the beginning of a new chapter. One spring morning, Trump made an unannounced visit to the house. As he walked through the wooden door, he saw that the home had transformed into something far beyond what he had imagined. Instead of a quiet retreat for Father Joseph, the house was alive with energy. In the living room, a few men were rearranging furniture. In the kitchen, a woman was helping Father Joseph cook. And on the front porch, children were playing, their laughter ringing through the air. Trump turned to Father Joseph, who stood nearby with a gentle smile on his face. "What have you done with this house?" Trump asked, his tone a mix of surprise and admiration. Father Joseph replied, his voice calm but resolute, "I couldn't keep such a great gift just for myself. I believe this house is far more meaningful as a sanctuary for those who have nowhere else to go." Trump stood silent for a moment, as though absorbing the weight of those words. Finally, he let out a rare, genuine smile. "You haven't just accepted help," he said. "You've turned it into a source of help for others. And that's exactly what I hope to see." Father Joseph looked around the house, his eyes shining with quiet pride. Not for what he had, but for what he could give. "We are not blessed to keep it to ourselves," he said. "We are blessed to share." Trump nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep respect. "Father Joseph, you're not just helping people, you're teaching them that hope exists, even in the places where we think everything has been lost." From that day on, the small house in the suburbs became more than just a shelter. It became a symbol of hope. Those who once found refuge there, after rebuilding their lives, returned to help others, creating an unending circle of love and compassion. A few months later, on a warm spring evening, the grand chandeliers of the White House illuminated the Grand Hall, where prominent figures, officials, and distinguished guests had gathered. This was no ordinary ceremony. Tonight, they weren't honoring a politician, a billionaire, or a celebrity, but an old priest, a man who had lived through darkness and found the light, not just for himself, but for countless others. Father Joseph entered the hall, dressed in a simple suit, his familiar silver cross still gleaming around his neck. As he walked in, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, and then a wave of applause broke out. Soft at first, but growing louder and more powerful, like waves crashing on the shore. He hesitated slightly, unused to such attention, but the encouraging looks from those around him gave him the strength to keep walking. On stage, President Donald Trump stood waiting. As Father Joseph stepped up to the podium, Trump extended his hand and shook his firmly. "Welcome, Father, to a place where you deserve to be honored," Trump said, his voice deep and filled with respect. Trump stepped to the microphone, scanning the room before beginning his speech. "Tonight," he said, "we are not just honoring one man, but the values he embodies: compassion, sacrifice, and the power of faith. Father Joseph is not just a priest. He is an inspiration to us all, a testament that even in the darkest moments, light can still shine through." The room fell completely silent, save for the commanding tone of Trump's voice. He continued recounting Father Joseph's journey, from a priest who lost everything to a man who chose to rise, not just to save himself, but to help others. Each story Father Joseph had written with his actions, from using $50,000 to help the homeless to transforming his home into a shelter, was retold with vivid detail, moving many in the audience to tears. But Father Joseph didn't stop there. Trump said he didn't just rebuild his own life. He helped dozens of others find hope again. He reminds us that sometimes all it takes is a hand extended at the right moment, and the power of kindness can change the world. Trump then turned to Father Joseph, holding up a small red velvet box. He opened it to reveal the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. "Father Joseph," Trump said, his voice slow and deliberate, "on behalf of the people of the United States, it is my honor to award you the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of your extraordinary compassion, faith, and dedication." Trump leaned forward and placed the medal around Father Joseph's neck. The entire hall rose to their feet, and thunderous applause erupted like a storm. Father Joseph stood there, tears welling in his eyes, his hand gently brushing the weighty medal on his chest. But more than the weight of the medal, he felt the weight of the stories, the people he had helped, and the hopes he had reignited. When the applause finally subsided, Trump continued, "Tonight, we're not stopping at honoring Father Joseph. We are going further. I am proud to announce the launch of the Light of Faith Fund, a national charitable foundation dedicated to supporting those who have dedicated their lives to serving others but find themselves in times of need. This fund will carry the name and spirit of Father Joseph, a beacon of light in the darkness." The room erupted once again in applause, the sound echoing throughout the grand hall. Father Joseph bowed his head in gratitude, his heart overwhelmed with emotion. When invited to speak, Father Joseph walked to the podium, his hands trembling slightly. Standing before the microphone, he looked out at the room where hundreds of eyes were fixed on him. Taking a deep breath, he began, his voice soft but growing stronger with each word. "This medal is not for me," he started, his voice catching momentarily. "It is for all those out there, those still struggling in the darkness, yet holding on to the belief that light will come. It is for those who never give up, even when life seems to have given up on them." He paused, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I am just a fortunate man, fortunate because, in my darkest moment, a hand was extended to me, and now, I am simply doing what I believe any of us would do, extending that hand to someone else." The room remained silent, each word sinking into the hearts of those listening. "The light of faith doesn't just come from God," he continued, his voice now steady and resolute. "It comes from all of us. It comes from compassion, from sacrifice, and from the determination never to leave anyone behind. And if that light could be ignited within me, I believe it can be ignited in anyone." Father Joseph concluded his speech with a brief but heartfelt prayer, dedicating it to all those still searching for a guiding light. The ceremony ended in celebration and inspiration, its impact rippling across the nation. But for Father Joseph, this was not the final destination. This was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one he believed would bring light to even more hearts. Father Joseph didn't see the medal or the standing ovations as the end of his journey. For him, they marked the beginning of a new mission. Following the White House ceremony, he embarked on a journey across America, carrying with him his story and a message of compassion and faith. He didn't just attend grand events or speak at high-profile conferences under bright lights. He also sought out the hidden corners of society, the places where light rarely reached. One rainy afternoon in Detroit, Father Joseph visited a shelter for single mothers. There, he met Lisa, a young woman cradling her newborn in her arms. Lisa had once been a preschool teacher, but her life fell apart when her husband left her. saddling her with overwhelming debt. When Father Joseph sat down beside her, she kept her head bowed, trying to hide her tears. "Lisa," he said, his voice gentle yet full of empathy, "you're not alone. You've been through so much just to be here, and that proves you're stronger than you think." Lisa looked up, her eyes filled with surprise. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. For the first time in months, she felt as though she wasn't entirely abandoned. Father Joseph didn't just encourage her with words. He connected her to a support program funded by the Light of Faith initiative, helping her secure stable housing and a job at a childcare center. Lisa's story became a living testament to the power of timely help and kindness. In Texas, Father Joseph met John, a veteran who had served in the Iraq War. John had been homeless for 7 years, haunted by harrowing memories and a deep sense of abandonment by society. When Father Joseph struck up a conversation with him at a bus station, John responded with a bitter laugh. "I've got nothing left to lose. God's forgotten about me too." Father Joseph placed a reassuring hand on John's shoulder. "John, God has never forgotten you, but sometimes He sends light through other people. Let me help you find hope again." Those words weren't a miracle, but they planted a seed in John's heart. With Father Joseph's assistance, John received medical care and counseling. A year later, John became the director of a support center for veterans, helping those who had once faced the same struggles he did to rediscover themselves. Father Joseph didn't stop at individual stories. He continued his journey, traveling to impoverished neighborhoods in New Orleans and forgotten towns in Appalachia. Yet no matter how far his travels took him, he always returned to his small room, a place where his silver cross hung on the wall, a constant reminder of his journey. One quiet night, as the moonlight gently streamed through his window, Father Joseph sat in the chair by his desk. He gazed at the silver cross on the wall, his eyes brimming with emotion. It wasn't just an ornament. It was a symbol of all the hardships he had endured and the hope he had brought to others. Closing his eyes, he whispered softly, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me the chance to serve. Everything I do is not for me, but for those you have entrusted to me." With that prayer, Father Joseph knew his mission was far from over. He understood that there would be more Lisas, more Johns, and countless others who would need a hand extended, a guiding light, and he was ready to continue his journey, not for glory, but to bring hope to the places that needed it most. Father Joseph's story wasn't just about one man finding redemption. It became a beacon that illuminated paths for countless others. His life, once shrouded in despair and solitude, evolved into a testament to the boundless power of compassion and faith. Through his journey, he taught the world that hope can thrive in the most barren of places, and that even the smallest gesture of kindness can become a spark powerful enough to light up someone's darkest hour. Father Joseph's message resonated deeply because it wasn't spoken from a place of privilege or ease. It was spoken from the depths of experience, from a man who had walked through the shadow of hopelessness himself. He didn't merely offer words, he offered himself, his time, his energy, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of people. For every individual he helped, whether it was Lisa cradling her newborn or John finding his purpose again, Father Joseph gave more than material aid. He gave them back their dignity, a sense that they were seen, valued, and not forgotten by the world or by God. As his story spread across the nation, it became more than a narrative of charity. It became a movement. Communities began to ask themselves, what small act can I do to make a difference? Churches, shelters, and local organizations began adopting the philosophy of one act of light. Even schools integrated his story into their lessons, teaching children that no matter how small they might feel, their actions could ripple outwards in ways they might never imagine. One particularly moving moment came when a young boy in Kansas wrote to Father Joseph. The boy, no older than 10, shared that he had started a fundraiser at his elementary school to help a local homeless shelter. "I'm not a big person, Father Joseph," the boy wrote in his neat handwriting, "but I can still make a big difference." Stories like this flooded Father Joseph's mailbox, each one reinforcing his belief that the smallest seeds of compassion, when planted, could grow into mighty forests of change. Father Joseph also found himself humbled by the unexpected ways his story influenced those he never imagined reaching. At one event in Los Angeles, a woman approached him with tears streaming down her face. She had seen the broadcast of the White House ceremony and confessed that she had been on the verge of giving up on her life. "Your words saved me," she told him, gripping his hands tightly. "They reminded me that there's still light, even when I couldn't see it." But Father Joseph never claimed credit for the transformation his story sparked. When asked about the impact he had made, he always responded the same way: "It was never about me. It's about what happens when we let our hearts stay open, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. I just held on to the light that was given to me and passed it along." Anyone can do the same. Through his journey, Father Joseph became living proof of the transformative power of faith in action. He believed deeply that it wasn't grand gestures or monumental actions that changed the world, but the steady accumulation of small, meaningful acts performed with love. He reminded people that they didn't need to be rich, powerful, or famous to make a difference. They only needed to care. And that, he said, was the miracle of kindness. It could spread like wildfire, igniting hope wherever it went. Even as the movement grew, Father Joseph stayed grounded. He remained the same man who had once clutched a tattered silver cross in the cold streets of Manhattan, praying for a sign that he wasn't forgotten. That cross now hung on the wall of his modest room, a constant reminder of where his journey began and how far it had come. He often gazed at it in quiet reflection, thanking God for giving him not just the chance to rebuild his own life, but the privilege of helping others rebuild theirs. His story wasn't just one of survival, it was one of resurrection. Father Joseph didn't just emerge from the darkness. He carried the light back with him and shared it with everyone he met. And for those who heard his story, it became impossible to see the world the same way again. His legacy was simple yet profound, that faith, compassion, and love could shine brightly enough to illuminate even the deepest shadows.